Alrighty, it's been a minute. It is now winter in Tasmania and it is raining and it's quite cold and I'm quite comfortable inside, so I'm going to stay here. So a bit of a change of scenery, but here we go. I'm going to discuss like a little idea today based off this quote I came across a little while ago. We're not going to try to achieve too much, but we're going to try and chat about some stuff. We'll see how we go. The quote is by a famous American naturalist and conservationist, and I'm sure he did lots of other things. A guy named John Muir, who's pretty famous in naturalist circles, especially in the US. The quote goes like this: "Whenever we try to pick anything out by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe." That might not be exactly word for word, but that's the essence of it. Basically, Muir is trying to say that isolation isn't really how the world works. Everything is interconnected. The world is a big spiderweb, basically. Everything is hitched to everything else. This applies particularly for nature. You can imagine a plant. We can isolate it and we can identify it and say, this is this plant, this is this species, for example. But a plant isn't really a plant without the stuff that makes it grow. A plant, really, by definition, it needs water, sunlight, and soil. At least most plants do. So, therefore, plants aren't really isolated. Sure, we might understand them from a scientific perspective in isolation, but nothing, especially in nature, exists in total isolation. Everything is hitched to everything else. The really cool thing that this quote does is it directly attacks scientific reductionism. Scientific reductionism or materialism or physicalism, any and all of those isms. Those isms all try and posit that we can isolate things, that the world can be reduced down to its constituent parts and understood and organised. Now, as humans, we quite like this because it makes sense. We can read a book and we can understand something to a high level because we can separate it all out. The human body. We can understand the human body by picking out all these different parts of it and then understanding it. This is quite helpful in healthcare, for example, because it means we can find what's wrong with a certain part of the body and try to fix it. But it doesn't tell the whole story. I think what's kind of happened, especially in modern times, is that we started to assume that this way of organising and understanding the world is, in fact, the reality of the world. This is a common thing that lots of worldviews do. They start to assume that their way of looking at the world is the objective way. And therefore, every other way is kind of ridiculous, off with the fairies. Every worldview has holes. If there was a worldview without holes, then we probably all would have the same worldview. But the fact is that we're all different and we all have different worldviews. Therefore, there's no perfect, all-encapsulating worldview that accounts for everything. And to be fair, scientific reductionism has more holes than most. The scientific method is a classic way of understanding the world, and it's a key part of reductionism. We take things apart and we understand them through the scientific method. And like I said before, it is super, super, super helpful in so many different ways. The scientific method likes to say that it's just observing. But it has constraints and it is limited by human bias. Humans are definitionally not objective. We are subjective creatures. And so any scientific experiment is going to have some element of bias. Even the most perfect experiment has this. Because, where's my little quote gone? Question everything, including your own method of questioning. An issue with the scientific method is that it is making the assumption that it is objective. By assuming your method and your way of doing something is objective, you then mean to say that your results are the ultimate reality. But how can this be the case if you don't have an objective person in the first place? A way I like to look at this problem is the idea of lenses, or glasses, I guess. No matter how we look at the world, we're looking at it through our lenses, our worldview lenses. We're putting on a pair of glasses. Pair of glasses? Pair of lenses? Can't really put on two glasses, that doesn't matter. But it's funny because many worldviews, like the Western scientific reductionist worldview, seems to think and likes to think that Its way of looking at the world is taking off the glasses completely and seeing things with objective, fresh eyes, aren't coloured by anything. But really, it's just another lens. It's another pair of glasses, another way of looking at the world. So while something like reductionism, the scientific method, is useful for understanding things, it's not the end-all and be-all. It's a lens to look at the world in a certain way that can be helpful in a lot of ways, but it doesn't account for everything. So, whenever we try to pick anything out by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. It's a good quote to live by, in a way, to understand that everything is connected. Nothing exists in isolation. This is a social message to us, perhaps, but it's also a deeper philosophical, ethical message. And I think the key point is linking this quote and the thing I wrote down as well. Question everything, including your own method of questioning. No matter what your worldview is, or what your religion is, or however you think about things, question it. Question everything, but particularly your own method of questioning. Because every method of questioning has holes, it has biases, because we are subjective creatures. I think it's quite a humbling message as well, because it helps us not look down on others for their worldviews and their thoughts. Because we can never really be fully certain that our way of looking at things is perfect, that it's blameless. At the end of the day, the quote that spurred on these thoughts in this video, this jumble of ideas, is just quite nice as well. It's quite reassuring, I feel like, that everything is hitched to everything else. I love the use of that word hitched. Not connected, but hitched. Everything relies and is attached somehow to everything else. It's quite a comforting thought in lots of ways, I think, and I can't quite describe why, but hopefully you know what I mean. Anyways, I'll try to come out with some more bits and pieces of some organised jumble at some point soon, maybe outside too once the rain stops. But yeah, have a good rest of your day and question everything, including your own method of questioning, and look at the world. Look at the world as it is, not just through your rigid views. Look at it holistically, maybe. I think it's a pretty good way of doing it. It accounts for a whole lot more than the rigid Western reductionist view, despite its good parts too. Have a good day. See you later.